Hi, welcome back. And if you're new, this is Life and Art with Nicole, and I'm your host, Nicole. I'm so excited because today I have Gareth Gwyn here with me. Gareth is an author and a documentarian, and we have a really enlightening conversation ahead, so stay tuned. Author, documentarian, and you said you do a few other things as well. What do you want to, what is that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that the purpose that I got tapped into was around exploring people's stories of self-realization, or you could call it transformation, or even how people have come to know their worth beyond conditions that were previously feeling trapped by. And so that was my driving curiosity. And then I found these mediums. I found, I can write. Okay, how would this be in writing? And then I recorded something one time, and I was like, wow, that was neat. And so I sort of started making these short films. And so the mediums of creativity came to me after I knew the sort of thing I wanted to focus on in terms of storytelling.
Right. And so your book is called?
It's called You Are Us.
You Are Us.
And it kind of comes from you are either with us or against us, but either with us or against is crossed out to say, wait a second, we don't actually have to be pitted against each other.
Right.
And we are reflections of each other. There's an esoteric, deeper meaning on that, but then also just in general, I found that so much learning comes from understanding how we impact each other and how in relationship dynamics so much can be revealed to us.
Right.
And that, seeing ourselves and everyone else is a really incredible way to live. So the tagline is how to build bridges in a polarized world, where we're seeing all this polarization happening in society, and really taking that big, bold, crazy concept of polarization and like drilling it down and saying, well, how does that affect the micro relationships, our communities, our families, like people that we love, and how is it showing up in our bodies?
Right. So how did it come about as far as like, I remember you had told me that you did interviews with different people, and then that sort of turned into the documentary, or was it vice versa?
Yes. So part of, as I was sharing about my curiosity of understanding people's stories, I started interviewing people, and I just recorded the interviews over the phone, some of them in person, but I just got this collection of stories, and I think, I'll put this into a book. So a few years ago, I started writing, and I came to this place. I was like, you know what, this is going to take a while. And so I came to produce a panel of people. And that panel was live streamed, which turned into the first short film that I made. And I was like, well, that was powerful. So then I started doing film interviews of people and having them edited and boiled down to this essence of this small short story of seeing someone, we have Israeli, Palestinian, and understanding that context in how you would see it through the lens of self-realization. And we have stories of survivors and perpetrators in Rwanda, and how conflict resolution happens after such horrifying atrocities. And we have, aspects that touch on race in the United States and gender dynamics, and kind of looking at how does self-realization impact social issues, and what does that mean for individual leadership. So those stories there's a lot of them are compiled in short films, and a lot of them are compiled in writing in the book. And then in addition, I have QR code readers in the book. So when you read a story that you come across in the book and there's an associated film, you can just scan it and then go really see the digital version.
That's really cool. That's super creative. So what inspired you to even get into this and start asking people about their self-realization and their own stories?
Yeah, so I had, I previously had a corporate job, which was incredible. And I learned so much, and a lot of the learnings I had in that context have transferred into what I'm doing. So I'm grateful for it. And there was something inside of me that was like, oh my gosh, there's something else I feel called to in this world. And I didn't know what it was, but I started embarking on this sort of stepping into the unknown discovery, and started aligning with different organizations who were more pursuing consciousness expansion. So I was working with an esoteric mystery school, Nine Gates Mystery School. I did some work with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I kept, coming out to the Bay Area in California, and got involved with an organization that was doing consciousness hacking, which was the Center of Transformation and Technology. So how can we build technologies that serve humanity instead of distract us?
Yeah.
So I sort of was exploring all these things, and so much of it was around healing. And it was understanding what are the parts of myself in my subconscious that I don't have awareness of that are influencing my life where I'm suffering, where I'm impacting people in ways I don't know, just anything very restrictive. And what was interesting is that I was also around a lot of social activism. But I was realizing that these worlds where this pursuit of consciousness modalities and this spirituality, and had a lot of words like the non-duality and the oneness of all, which has this beauty. And then this activism world is more coming from the absolutism. There's a right and there's a wrong. And so I'm like, well, these worlds seem to not be...
Yeah, they're opposite almost.
Almost, yeah. And so my curiosity was born at the intersection. We're saying, what if these were not in conflict? What if they were not mutually exclusive? What is that world like?
Yeah.
Because I think that the voice of social activism is so important. And if it was integrated with some of this, we might actually get to a place where healing can become a component of our societal movement.
Yeah.
And so that's where finding people who had done that, but finding the people who had done it in the midst of these incredibly oppressive social issues. So we actually can start to see that it's possible, that we can free ourselves from adversity and from oppression, and that there's a lot of opportunity in that for our own growth and our own expansion. So instead of being trapped by adversity, we can find that spaciousness where it actually becomes something that's purposeful.
Right. So taking a holistic approach to activism, essentially, taking a holistic approach to the change that needs to be done in the world. And I completely understand that. And that's what's needed in society. And you had said, there's a dualistic aspect to activism. There's a right and a wrong. And in a sense, yes, we live in a very dualistic world. However, it's a holistically dualistic world, if that even makes sense. It's like, I don't even think that we can even say there's a right and a wrong. There just is one way and there's another way, And so I feel like, through activism, if we understand that there are multiple means to an end, we can achieve that. And so far with activism, it's been like, no, we have to do it this way. And I find the same in politics, and the same in education, and the same in any aspect of life. There is this, you have to do it this way, and whatever other way you do it is wrong. And I don't think that's correct. I don't think that is helpful to anyone, because we all are here to bring something independent or something unique to the world in our own independent way. And if we stifle that in someone and say, no, you can't do that, you can't approach this particular thing in that way, then what are we doing as a society? What are we doing to people's growth as a society, Yeah,
I really appreciate the way you're articulating that. And I feel like one thing that's really interesting about the social activism is like, it does bring this right-wrong approach. And if it's continuously interpreted in that lens, then it can feel stuck and frustrating. And at the same time, I think the value of coming with a, hey, I want things to change. This is not okay. I think that when it's interpreted with the deeper vision behind where it's coming from, there is it's so that those voices is so important. Yeah. So important. And so I think that maintaining the awareness you're speaking to, where it's like creative expression versus feeling threatened by it.
Right. Have you traveled to places like Rwanda or places like, you have? So what was your experience like in a country like that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I think one thing that's really compelling, at least that I've discovered about being white and being a woman, is that I have access from an identity perspective to oppressive energies, and how I would subconsciously somehow position myself superior in certain contexts. Wow. But then also I would subconsciously position myself inferior in certain contexts.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think going to Rwanda, I was able to get to see even more of that because, Rwanda, I think colonialism was one of the contributing factors to how identities became solidified in Rwanda, which then led to the genocide against the Tutsi.
Yeah.
And so as someone who has more of a history in colonialism, to feel all of that and understand this in that context and hear these horrifying stories and grieve and cry with people I had my own reckonings.
Wow.
And then also to just understand, that in this context, I would be vulnerable to the same things that happened, that they were vulnerable to, whether I would be a perpetrator or whether I would be one of the survivors or the people who didn't make it.
Yeah.
That we're all vulnerable, whatever context we're in, to our conditions and what will call us into parts of ourselves that we wouldn't think we would ever step into. But in a certain context, with enough pressure and with enough delusion or outside influence, we can step into becoming anything. And so I think there's a humility in that I'm not beyond, anything that could happen.
Yeah, that's really powerful because, I feel like if everybody around the world, if we all recognized the impact that we've had on each other throughout history, and I think we could heal society in that sense, like just having that sort of self-awareness and, being an outsider in a different country, no matter what your skin color is, I feel like makes people, that's why I encourage people to travel a lot because, when you go, like even myself, when I travel to different places, like if I were to go to India for, per se, I haven't been, I'd love to go, but I would probably have a similar, obviously not the same, but a similar experience in that I am a different person stepping into a world that I don't know very well, and trying to sort of understand and accept the way that they do things, and not try to make anyone feel bad about anything, and not try to you know what I'm saying, like not feel any sort of sense of superiority because I'm American or whatever,
Definitely.
And I feel like a lot of people who travel get that lesson, especially if you're traveling to countries that are so polar opposite to where you're from,
Yeah. And I think, kind of touching back on what we're talking about with the absolutism and the relativity, it's like, I feel this a little bit of tension sometimes in context where I'm like, okay, well, in a cultural relativity, I want someone to be able to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
And I want to just honor that culture, that path, and then there's the absolutism part that comes on where if I feel like there's an oppressive context, I'm like, wait, no. And I feel the part of me that wants to step in and change it. And so at what point is it let it be versus like, wait, I feel called to like a soul level intervention, and there's a lot of context still in the Middle East where I feel particularly empathetic with women. And I'm like, well, it's not my space to go there. And I feel the depth of like anger in certain contexts.
I feel exactly the same way, especially with the hijab, the issue with the hijab and those women that got in trouble, I guess, from their government for, what is it, like hijab burning or something that they did? It was their stand essentially against an oppressive system. It wasn't necessarily, I didn't, granted, I can't speak for these women, but I didn't see it as like we are going against our religion or our faith or our culture. It was more like we're standing against this oppressiveness that's making us feel inferior. And I completely stand with that, And strangely enough, on the other side, I do understand the outrage that it caused because here's a society that's been one way for so long, and then there's this sort of pushback. There's this fight against it, like rage against the machine almost. And we've experienced that so many times in America in so many different ways, but in countries like that, I feel like they, now granted, I am only speaking from an outsider. Totally. I don't know what it was like on the inside of those countries, but I'm venturing to say they haven't had a lot of resistance. Yeah. And so when it comes up, and this is not just speaking for Middle Eastern women, this is speaking for everyone around the world. We're seeing it everywhere. It's happening in France right now. There's this sort of pushback against the oppressiveness of their society. We're seeing it everywhere in all aspects of life. And, I like to look at it from an astrological approach. And I say, well, we are shifting into a different kind of age. And so this is expected. But because it's happening so violently, it's almost like a birthing process. We have to shed our old skin, or we have to sort of break through the embryonic fluid or whatever it's called, to start something new and create something new that's better for everybody and not just one class of people, not one gender or not one race,
Yeah. And there's a lot of resistance to change, like you said, and grief in the death of that. Things need to be dismantled and things need to die for that rebirthing. And that if there's a world where we've built cultures that are resistant and we don't have the tools and practices to understand how to let grief flow through the body, then that's where I think we get a lot of the distortions of violence reactivity, where grief is coming out in a distorted way. And so that kind of can make it the dismantling even more violent.
Yeah. Wow. That's so powerful what you just said, because it is like a holding on to what was, and this sort of resistance to allow something new to come into its place. And it's like no, I don't want to let it go. And it is coming out in a violent way. They're like, rather than saying, wait, this is my own I'm internalizing this pain of having to let go of a society or a way of life that I knew. And it's coming out in a violent manner.
Yeah.
I never even really kind of thought about it like that, but that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah. And it's hard because I feel like we have so much time pressure and urgency, and it's so competitive that to stop and learn to feel is hard.
Yeah.
In a lot of cultures and contexts. And so I think that's frustrating, but it's also the opportunity. It's also like, well, how do we inspire that?
Yeah.
How do we encourage and create examples where people see possibility that is another way for us to relate with this increasing pressure and horrifying violence?
Yeah. So you had mentioned that you were exploring what esoteric kind of knowledge, and you were an esoteric kind of organization. What are the things that you kind of took away from that, and how have you sort of like incorporated that in your own personal life?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so the one of the experiences I did was with an organization called Nine Gates Mystery School. And Nine Gates Mystery School assembles spiritual leaders from different traditions around the world. And we sort of dive into this, this world for 11 days in one time, and then another 6 months later, another 11 days, where we're just going through these embodied experiences for like a day or two at a time of each deep tradition and what rituals that these traditions have brought from a mystical lens to our world. And it's interesting because in all that change of saying, okay, well, this is how Sufis did it. This is how the Kabbalah, and this is one of my favorites was Sobonfu Some from Burkina Faso, who did incredible grief rituals,
Wow.
And the constant within all that differentiation is you and your own soul, you and your own who am I amidst all of this mysticism. So I think that level of capacity to swim in the paradox of distinction and universality, that there's an infinite quality to myself that I'm realizing as everything else changes.
Yeah.
That I have to reckoning with that eternal aspect of myself is almost even harder than reckoning with my mortality.
Yeah.
And so that to me became a big part of what allowed me to move forward and find like the purpose on earth. You know? And so that led to a lot of this storytelling and work. And, Mystery School was one component of that journey for me.
Yeah.
And I think it also speaks to what you were saying about that cultural relativity, about understanding that at the essence of all these different places around the world, people have discovered this. And we have something to learn and glean from the way in which that they've brought it to life. And it's so different and fascinating, but it's not mutually exclusive from each other.
Right.
And so I've gained a real interest and value from continuing to explore those deeper esoteric and mystical lenses into different cultures.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I said to you previously when we had a conversation that I feel like you and I are almost like soul sisters in a way, because we're on our own spiritual journeys, but they seem to kind of cross paths.
Yeah.
And so there's several things that I wanted to kind of touch on with that. But the first thing is that, you had mentioned the different esoteric traditions coming together and all the different countries. It made me think back to Model UN.
Yeah.
In high school. Remember we were in
Incredible.
Model UN?
Oh my gosh.
I know, it was so long ago. And so Gareth and I went to high school together, by the way. Forgot to mention that. But we were in Model UN. And so that kind of made me think of that. Like this Nine Gates esoteric school, it almost seems like a Model UN for spirituality or esoteric traditions in a sense.
Yeah, and that's an incredible analogy. I love it so much. And it just shows how pulling together a structure is important to be able to like go through an experience in a sense, but within that structure, it can be malleable. It can, we can adapt, we can change, it doesn't have to remain that way, but having something to step into, at least to get to start and get catalyzed, is really helpful. And that Model UN created that structure for us to all then like have these incredible reflections back to learn about.
And to think about, and to like, because in Model UN it was essentially like the UN for, high schoolers, and so we had to do these, do a lot of research into the countries. We had to write the essays and then present them when we went up to DC, remember? And we like had that whole convention. That was super
amazing.
fun.
Yeah.
But, so it's interesting how like the path that I feel like Model UN was definitely like in there in a sense, in like your path and in your journey, and was for mine as well, because, later on I started studying different cultures and different religions, and I really dived deep into that. And, I studied Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, like all of the isms, Zoroastrianism, because I wanted to learn about the country and the culture. And in many cases, the culture kind of spanned across multiple countries. But in the second case, or the other case, was the spiritual aspect of it, because I felt like there was something in my material life or my physical life that I wasn't getting fulfilled by, and so I was like, there's something more to this place that we're in. And so that's what made me sort of like really dive into the other religions or traditions. I like to use the word traditions, because I feel like that is more in line of what they are, not religions, but they become religions, but they're spiritual traditions essentially. And so that's why I was saying like we're like soul sisters in that sense, because you went your direction, your path with it, and I went my path, and we keep like crossing, intersect. And another thing, you had philosophy group in college, and like, I used to come.
Gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. I remember when I had like reached out to you, because I saw that you had written your book, and I just I've been following your journey and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing that, you've written the book and like the path that you're on. Because I just remember when we would meet for philosophy club and we would have these deep conversations.
Incredible.
And it's just sort of manifested even more in your life. And that's amazing. And in my life, I feel like I've implemented them in my different artistic, aspects and endeavors. So I just find it to be so cool. Amazing,
I love how like all those seeds were planted, and I feel grateful that we had that space to grapple with these things. And you're right, there's so many aspects that started long ago. And I'm appreciating your memory of like how it all adds up. I'm also thinking about in this book, it's a compilation of other people's realization stories, but I also include a lot about my own. Really? And I was thinking about your book as well.
Oh,
and you share how that's a lot of the story that you go through, and like the parts of yourself that you've connected to that have come into transformation is reflected in the story. Yeah. And so I feel that's cool that we've both leveraged storytelling and writing as a way to express that journey.
I feel like self-realization is key to healing, and I believe you kind of agree with that.
Definitely.
Because I feel like in our society, we've been almost conditioned to find external ways to cope. Whether it's, drugs, alcohol, anything really. It could be television, video games, playing golf all the time. I mean, it could be anything, as a means of escaping something that we don't quite want to dive into within ourselves. Yep. And so self-realization is so key to unlocking your own, whether it's traumas or fears or pains or issues from your past life, and then releasing them so that you can move forward and live a very healed life. And healed people heal other people. Yep. And just like and the same goes in the opposite direction. Hurt people hurt people. And I feel like there's a lot of people that are hurt walking around, and they are either too afraid to come to that self-realization of, I'm a hurt person, and everyone that I encounter, I'm also hurting. Yep. And that staying in this place of hurt, this place of non-realization, then we get into those polarizations in society. Yep. Where people say, no, you have to do it this way. You know what I'm saying?
Very well said. Yes. It's making me think of my friend Eldra. His story is in this book. And Eldra had a really traumatizing event when he was young, and he went into gang life.
Wow.
And then later in prison, he had an opportunity to learn to feel his emotions and deal with his anger. And all these memories came up where he realized, oh, I became the perpetrator who hurt me.
Wow.
I became that because I didn't process it. All of that pain transformed into the violence. And and to stop that cycle, like you're saying, instead of becoming what it is you're demonizing through unresolved pain, then to be able to step in and resolve your own pain, your own traumas, whether that's acute trauma, like he had in this case was molestation, but in some cases it's even just passive conformity, where we've adopted aspects of culture that are not us, and we're operating in something that's further from our essence.
Yeah.
And so being able to do that, I think, is important. And it's funny, it's also making how you shared that. Also, what came up for me was just this romanticized idea of self-realization where it's like, yeah, let's all go self-realize. And then when you get into it, it's like deep, dark, in painful grief, and it's hard work.
It's very hard work, and it takes years. It's not like you can go to a retreat for 2 weeks and suddenly you're healed. Like, no, you go to that retreat for 2 weeks and they pull up something that happened, and you have a memory, and you're like, oh my gosh, and then it takes the next 12 years of your life to resolve
and
it.
then another one,
and then another you go to another retreat, and another thing comes up. And I feel like it's been a cycle for a long time, and it's funny. It's so funny we're having this conversation because I have been trying to figure out where this cycle started, and I mean, we could say it traces back to colonialism, but I think it goes further back than that. Honestly,
Definitely.
I think it just is almost maybe part of our human nature to
I agree.
hide from the truth, or maybe it could be just a product of our current way of doing things. It's possible that in the past, in the ancient times, they knew how to process their grief. They didn't push the hurt onto others. I mean, I don't know. This is something that I personally have been trying to figure out, because I'm like, how do we heal society? Of course, it starts with the self,
right?
But how did it get to the point where we're passing on generational traumas, and generational issues, and curses. I don't know if some people believe that they are curses, that passing on the trauma is an actual curse. And so it's like, how do we get to that? Where did it start? Well,
I appreciate that, that truth-seeking curiosity that I experience with you. It's incredible. It's very inspiring. And it's funny because I do think that as I was studying where I came from, my ancestry that leads back to Europe and Wales and Scotland particularly, it was like, well, what happened in pre-colonial Europe?
Yeah.
Where were the energy systems for my body in these indigenous cultures? And I'm like, I came across the Celtic cauldrons.
Yeah.
And it's this beautiful, deep Celtic wisdom. And then all of that was wiped away. So prior to colonialism, in pre-colonialism, the same level of culture being wiped out from my ancestors happened. And so I'm like, oh wow, now I get to reconnect and discover this deep esoteric tradition that came from my lineage. But that disconnection has pros and cons, but part of the con was it turns into things like cultural appropriations or whatever, not having something I'm connected to, and so distorting things outside where I'm trying to grasp for some way to make meaning of this crazy world.
And that's so true, because I feel like now, because of these missing traditions in people's lives, people are becoming almost a caricature of what was, trying so hard to get back to our ancient traditions that people are. In the case of let's take yoga. Yoga is an ancient tradition. It wasn't just in India that they practiced this. It wasn't just a Hindu tradition. It was practiced by Egyptians as well.
Yeah.
But now yoga has become this fad, or maybe it is now still, but it was for the past 10 years. It was this huge fad, and everyone was doing it. And I also was into it because I liked the breath work aspect. I liked the movement
Which
aspect.
is a beautiful gift to give a mainstream culture that's struggling.
Right. I know. And I'm actually glad that it happened, because it was almost the catalyst to get people to start becoming more self-aware, But at the same time, I feel like there's some people that have used these spiritual or esoteric traditions as a way of like, oh, that's cool. I want to do that, you know,
Right,
like
right.
caricaturizing it, if that makes sense.
Right.
You know?
Which can be, it can carry aspects of pain for where they came from, where it's like, oh, wait, no, that's being weaponized.
Yeah.
It's being weaponized in a different way. And I feel vulnerable to that in life in general, of getting really into something and being like, oh my gosh, this. And then it's the way I relate with it isn't, I have to maintain like an intention to expand my self-awareness of the relationship that I have. So I agree. And it's funny. I went to do some work with a shaman in Peru.
Oh, cool.
And which is kind of another thing. You're saying it's like, oh, let's go to Peru and work with the shaman. And it's like, well, okay, I'll just have to accept that I'm someone from the United States coming to do that, and at the same time remain humble about that I do have an authentic and honest part of my seeking. Yeah, and that these gifts are something that can embrace more cultures, and that there is a welcoming aspect to a lot of shamanistic work that is actually embracing the Western cultures that we've evolved into. And so I feel like it was important to maintain both and maintain integrity in my own seeking process, and still allow in the globalized travel and world we're in, allow the cultures to have impacts on each other, allow the change to happen instead of remaining isolated.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something I want to do, is go down to Peru and do the shaman experience, just because that's part of my indigenous culture and I want to connect to that. But then also I do appreciate non-indigenous people doing that, because it's not just a Peruvian thing, or it's not just an indigenous thing. This is something, it's a way of tapping into your soul, into your spirit. And that doesn't belong to any one culture. That even belongs to everyone.
Even with the indigenous cultures here in the United States.
It's, and being spiritually aware and tapping into your own spiritual essence and your spiritual nature is something that all human beings have a right to do, you know,
and access to
on their own. And to say, oh, you can't go do that, or, oh, it's not right for, you to go and experience and have an ayahuasca ceremony in Peru or whatever. I'm not sure if you did that, but you know what I'm saying?
I do.
And it's for people to even kind of say that it's not cool for people to do that. I say, well, actually it's part of that person's journey and that person's spiritual experience. And however you need to get to that spiritual place and tap into your higher self, I say do it, you know, as long as you know that that's what you're doing, you know, as long as like it doesn't become a caricature and you're just doing it because it's a fad. Because when you get down there and the shaman, puts you through the stuff,
it's real.
It's real.
It's real.
It ain't a fad anymore. It's real.
It's real. And it reminds me, because the jungle, like the Amazon jungle, it reminds me of what you were saying about where did this stuff start? How did we get so violent? And I'm like, this. Similar to like the romanticization of self-realization, I think there's also a romanticization of nature, and that it's like serene. And I'm like, well, the jungle is a war zone. It's pure survival, and I feel connected to the part of me that has like that animalistic,
a tribal kind of
like there's like a
warrior aspect,
and so there's like this reckoning that, okay, well, where all this stuff started is still living in me, and the jungle can reflect that. And that it's like part of being embodied and incarnate on Earth in this strange biology. And the humanity piece, it's like once we recognize that we actually don't have to be reactive or have those kind of like the primal drive be the only thing that's driving us, there's spaciousness for other motivations, like deep purposes and creativity and expansion and transformation that is unique to the human experience. As far as, I'm speaking as a human, so
I know.
But
absolutely, that's amazing. And I feel like the jungle, like you said, like the jungle it is a war zone. And I mean, I don't have a jungle in my backyard, but I have a garden and I get to watch what the bugs do to each other. And, and there's an owl that's like I hear all the time. And then there's squirrels scurrying around whenever they hear the owl, and all these other types of like birds and creatures that live like, because the woods are like literally right behind my house. And so I'm sort of observing whenever I'm home, because I work from home, and I'm observing out the window, like what's happening out there. And I'm like, wow, this is wild. And I couldn't even imagine if there were like anacondas and jaguars and like, all of that also. Cause it's a tough place. And I feel like,
very tough.
And I feel like, the world for humans even used to be tough. It used to be like, it was survival of the fittest, and, in the sense of like, you have to go and hunt for your food. Yeah. And now we've become so passive because we can just go to the grocery store.
Right.
And everything is so easy, whereas, and we don't have an appreciation for nature anymore, to the point where we now think that we are above nature.
Yeah. We've separated ourselves with walls and saying, okay, the jungle's in the garden and we have a wall. The mosquitoes aren't going to come inside. Right. If ants come, we're going to kill them. Yeah. And so there's this like separation that has happened architecturally that perpetuates that in some ways. And it's like the harmony that comes from, and the sustainability that comes from the jungles and the nature worlds and things. It's like there is an acceptance of death. There is an acceptance of mortality. There is an acceptance that I honor the role that other people are in and where they are. And it's like within the war, there's sustainability and harmony in a strange paradoxical way. Yep. And I think that's part of where we've also created something that humans could step further into opportunity.
Yeah. I feel like we're starting to figure out like how we've got so far away from our true natural selves and our true spiritual selves. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think it was when we put the walls up, because the way, in indigenous culture, it's the great spirit, and it's the spirit of all things. And it's in animals, it's in plants, it's in the wind, it's in the air, it's in the rocks, it's in everything. And it's that spiritual essence. You'll find this in Taoism too. There's a great quote in the Tao Te Ching, which I love, the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. And the quote is, naming fragments the mysteries of life into 10,000 things and their manifestations. Beautiful. And it's my very favorite quote probably ever, because it's so true. The second we put a name to something, we're separating it from the whole. The second we put a wall up, we're separating ourselves from the whole picture, the holistic aspect of life. And when we are connected to nature, we are part of the Great Spirit. We see the Great Spirit. We are intimate with it. We know it, and we vibrate with it on a harmonious level. Yeah. And the second we put the walls up and we think that we are separate, and we start killing the bugs that come into our space, and we think that we are above all the creatures out there because they're out there, and we can kill them whenever we want, and we can cut down trees and cut down forests.
And even humans that threaten us.
Yeah. And we can get rid of the other humans that threaten us. It's the sense of superiority that takes us, that fragments us from the whole.
Which can then perpetuate a sense of extraction. It's like, oh, well, then we'll just go cut down all those other trees and not feel the tree. Yeah. And so there's like that extractive quality comes from that disconnection.
Yeah. And disconnection. That's exactly, I have chills just thinking about it right now, because it's so true. Like the disconnection, we are so disconnected from nature, from, as indigenous cultures say, the Great Spirit. And that is your true self connected with the world around you. Yeah. And that is, I think, how and when we are connected to that, that's how we remain in high consciousness. That's how we remain connected to our spiritual selves. Because we can feel the plants, we can feel the trees, we can feel the other animals on an energetic level.
Right. Yes. And you mentioned earlier, like the concept of like recognizing how being American could impact another culture. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. It's like, what are the facets of our identities that are keeping us in disconnection from experiencing like something in front of us clearly? Yeah. Whether it's a tree, whether it's another culture. It's like, oh, well, this idea of that I think I am something, that I think I'm an American, I think I'm a woman, I think I'm, a writer or whatever, that those solidifications of those identities can be elusive, but subconsciously hold us back from connection where we don't even recognize it. Or like, I'm a human, and that's that's nature, like
Yes.
you're saying, you know, and it's wait, I'm kind of a human, but maybe what is a human?
Right.
Instead of questioning all of that and
Yeah.
understanding what we've reified.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, what is a human really? Because, I mean, how are we so different from anything else?
We're made of microbes.
Yeah.
Like there's galaxies in my gut.
Yeah, totally.
Microbes, like having a whole world.
Yeah,
like,
doing whatever they're doing down there. Yeah.
we're made up of nature.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. And then it's outside and wow. I mean, I feel like my mind is just going right now because there's so many different things I feel like we could talk about and so many different like aspects of this. And I really do truly think that that's what contributed to the disconnection with everybody and everything right now. And right now in society, we're scrambling to get back to this sense of like spirituality because we've almost obliterated it from our lives by keeping ourselves fragmented and separate from everything else.
Yes. I think one of the shifts for me that really helped was actually in the convergence of the sadness of that dualistic aspect and then bringing spirituality into matter, like the divinity within biology and objects, in the sense of like, oh, wait, what purpose or what energy comes from remembering to connect and getting disconnected again and then remembering again. And
oh, wow.
You know, breaking the delusion of the separation isn't just happen one time. Just that process of continuously saying, oh, something got me disconnected. And now how do I reconnect? And like that process itself is not like a destination. It's like a living.
Yeah.
And when I'm in my integrity of continuously remembering that, I feel energized.
Yeah.
I don't feel drained by the horrors of the world as much as I feel the care deep inside and being able to come through and show up in ways that I can deeply connect or serve or help or support because I'm connected to myself. So I have the capacity to do it.
Right.
You know, versus like constant frustration that nothing is changing and this is horrifying. And, you know, there's just more access to joy in the care.
I like memes. And so there's this like really great meme and it's like this cartoon guy and he's sitting on a train there's two cartoon guys and they're sitting literally opposite each other. And one guy's looking at one side of the window and it's like this mountain and it's craggly and dark. And he has this like sense of just this look of despair on his face. And then on the opposite seat, there's this guy who looks just like him and he's looking out the window and it's bright and it's beautiful and it's like, the ocean and he has this smile on his face. And I think the meme is like, this all depends on your perspective or something like that. And that's so true to what you just said. Like this constant pulling, you could easily feel down, right? From what's happening with the world. But if you have a higher perspective or a higher outlook on things, you kind of see the silver lining.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's the opportunity in storytelling too.
Yeah.
Where we can rewrite the narratives. And so much of the narrativization of storytelling has this like us and them, or like there's an enemy and there's a hero.
Yeah.
And it's pitted against where we're gonna deify this one group or person and we're gonna demonize this other one as a monster or something.
Yeah.
And it's like this. But in the narrative, if you actually are reclaiming the deeper purpose within traumatizing experiences, then it's like, well, wait, nobody's really a demon and nobody's really a hero.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're all heroes. Sometimes we're all demons. We're all vulnerable to being either expression.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're like, to what you're pointing to is that like we are the ones who can take responsibility for how we interpret reality, how we make meaning of it, and then how we share stories that can inspire people instead of perpetuating this idea of good and bad that is like objectified. You know?
We do see that a lot in storytelling is you have the enemy and then you have the hero. And I'm wondering now if that is another thing that has contributed to this sense of like, oh, they're bad. They are the enemy. This sense of like, they're different from us. So they have to be the bad guy. And even in film, we find this, in film for a long time, the bad guy was typically always like a black man, you know, and that perpetuated this sense of like, oh, black men are dangerous. They're scary. And it's like, no, they're not. They're just another human. Right. They're another, group of people.
But then people were biased to looking for something that would
Right.
reconfirm the narratives they had been sold.
Yeah. Narratives, because, and that's what is one of our driving problems in this world, is these narratives that paint people, paint pictures of people that are not correct, or are biased or subjective, or and painting people in the wrong light, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And especially when it's storytellers or filmmakers or writers that are not familiar with that culture. That's why I think this is so amazing that you have actually been to these places. You've sat down and talked to these people from these different places, because you get to hear their story.
Yes.
And you're not taking this sense of like, oh, I have this idea of what it's like, so let me write about it. It's like you're really getting to the root of who these people are in their own stories.
Yeah, and I think that is one distinction, particularly in film, where people can share in their own tone of voice, their own words, and you get that full transmission of their story from them.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's been gone through some like filter.
Yeah.
There is some filtering and editing, which from a documentarian perspective, I'm like, wait, I want to own that everything has a little bit of bias. I'm biased to crafting stories that are self-realization focused. So there is a lean, and at the same time, I want it to be as honest to that person's story and the way they want to say it, the way it feels inside of them to share.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a delicate balance that I feel it's tricky, and there's room for misinterpretation, and also it's compelling and inspiring to just be in the journey of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you have any like favorite writers or favorite authors that have kind of inspired your not journey? Yes, in a sense, but more so like inspired the changes, the spiritual changes that you have yourself gone through? Yeah,
there's definitely a lot of writers. One thing that does come to mind is a filmmaker, Joshua Oppenheimer, and he made a movie called The Act of Killing. And I think one of the things that inspires me is people who are willing to turn towards empathy for a perpetrator.
Interesting.
And I appreciate that from the standpoint of like truth and reconciliation or restorative justice ideas, where we come together and the healing of the perpetrator is also valued as much as the healing of the person who feels victimized by the violent acts or harm that's been done. And in his film, he explores the psyche of the perpetrator in a genocide situation, and I feel connected to like where that person, like how they got to the point where they would kill.
Yeah.
And so I think I do feel inspired by people who are willing to look at what other people might demonize or ostracize. And so even the two of the main stories in this book are, one is a reformed Ku Klux Klan member and one is a reformed jihadist who came out of these like crazily tight, rigid identities, shedded and came healed through it.
Yeah.
But their identities are often demonized in society. And so I think that our healing is so interdependent, and that though the stories that have been willing to see the complexity in humanity and not just make these two sides has always been really inspiring to me.
Yeah.
Because so much story will lean on how we interpret what a victim is. And I'm like, well, wait, underneath the perpetrator, there's a victim.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. And that goes right back to the cycle of trauma, the cycle of abuse, even generational traumas and generational issues that get passed on. Is the victim becomes the perpetrator, and you find that in like a lot of sexual trauma and sexual abuse,
which speaks to the cycle you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's like and that just goes and goes, and so. You do have to kind of look at the perpetrator and say, well, how did a beautiful little baby, innocent, that comes into the world become, a genocidal person, you know, like that just feels totally okay killing other, innocent people. And it's like something triggered, something was switched off, or something was switched on in them, depending on what the situation is. And so we do have to look at that, and we do have to look at that in the sense of healing. We can't just expect people, we can't say that only victims can heal. No. The perpetrators also, like you just said, they have to heal through it, because they have to recognize that what they're doing is wrong, you know, and they have to heal from it. And I commend all people, including the two people that you mentioned in your book. I commend anybody who's done atrocious acts that can come forward and, you know, the religious people would say repent, but it is a sense of healing. You're healing through it. You're recognizing what you did wrong, and you're making that conscious effort to change.
Yeah. And that in itself can be a horrifying process. Reckoning with what I have done.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it makes sense that people would hold themselves back, defense mechanisms, like you're talking about addictions and all the things that keep us separate. Like we would use those distractions to not have to have that level of pain of recognizing that. Like back to the self-realization is not so sexy all the time.
I know. And that's, you know, it's amazing, because that's on like a very high level, like, you know, genocide is a very high level, right? But even on the individual level, like there's little things that people don't want to recognize in themselves.
All day.
And like, and it's like you run across people who have narcissistic tendencies, and you have run across people who are rude, or, I mean, there's a whole variety of things that people can do as either a coping mechanism, or they don't reckon they're adopting it from their parents because that's how their parents were, and so they are themselves. That's how they think that they're supposed to act. And they cause pain to other people on a micro level, but that pain might become something bigger in their lives, you know? And so everybody has to consciously, like you said, consciously, you're in constant spiritual development. It's never like okay, I did that time, you know, I'm good with my life now. Like, no, it's all day, all week, all year, all lifetime.
And it can be energizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be energizing and it could be depressing at the same time. It's like this constant, like, you know, go up and down. But, I mean, but it's important for everybody to go through that. And no matter, even people who think that they're healed, there's probably still an aspect that needs healing, you know, like myself, this is a journey that I've been on for 12 years. And sometimes I catch myself either thinking negatively or saying something just like blurts out of my mouth, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I immediately apologize, because I'm like, I did not mean to say that. I'm so sorry.
But you can see it, that it's still coming through.
Yeah. And so it's like it is a constant, change, like process.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of, like, in the self-development world, there's this like term of shadow work.
Yep.
And I have found that my exploration with that to be some of the most potent material for my own capacity to love myself. And I found one of the guideposts that's helped me is like, anytime someone does or says something that I feel triggered or reactive to, then that's where like the you are us kind of thing, where it's like, oh, there's something that about the expression of this person that I haven't accepted in myself. And so instead of trying to change them, I'm like, oh wait, what is it about that has activated me, and how can I learn from that activation about my own resistance and defensiveness and parts of myself I don't want to see, and move towards the realization of that could be interpersonal by getting curious and learning from more, or it could just be, wow, now I'm triggered, I need to go explore this by myself. Like it could be either, but that's where I find I'm grateful when I find myself either triggered by someone, wanting to blame them, feeling judgmental. I'm like, oh, this is exactly the thing that I need to find what I can't see.
Yeah. It's like people come into our lives to show us our true selves. Yeah. And there's this excellent book that I read a long time ago. It's by Baba Ram Das, and it's called Be Here Now.
Love it.
You read it?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh my god.
Love
like
it.
I don't come across people who've read that book. Brilliant book. And
timeless, but grounded.
Totally. And one of my favorite sections, you're my soul, this is right into it. But one of my favorite sections in the book is when, you know, he's standing in front of his guru, who he thinks is his guru, and it's a mirror. Because the way the book is designed is that it's mostly images, like drawn images. It's almost like looking at peering into someone's diary almost. And,
Yeah.
and the words are all kind of like
Yep.
twisted and all around, like written all, it's very, very cool. But the page where he talks about the guru, well, there's a whole section on the guru, but the guru is the mirror essentially. And so when you,
It's like very confronting.
Yeah. And so
you.
it's so great. It's a great translation, for life as well, because every person that comes to you is your mirror essentially,
Yep.
you know, and when you can recognize, like you just said, like the things that trigger you about that person, or something that person said that makes you feel unsettled, that is the mirror in front of you showing you yourself.
Definitely. And the more you can clearly see that, the more you can actually be with someone.
Yeah.
Versus the ideas that we have of how we're interpreting who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, a lot of people who have, relationship, like, you know, I mean, every relationship really, like I just said, every person that comes to you essentially is your guru and is your mirror. And whether you accept what they have to show you or not, and this is what's so amazing about life and what I've discovered, if there's a lesson that you're supposed to learn and someone comes to you to help teach you that lesson, they don't know that they're coming to you to teach that lesson. They might be coming to you because they find you attractive, or, you know, you have a great connection with them. And so they want to be in your life, or they want to date you or marry you or whatever. But that person at the end of the day is coming to teach you a lesson, and you are also teaching them a lesson in that relationship. But, if you don't learn, what I've learned is that if you don't learn the lessons that life kind of brings to you, that lesson will get increasingly harder. Like, if you don't learn it with this person, it'll come again. And it's not necessarily people, it could be situations, you know? So it's like, if you don't learn it this time, well, whoa, buddy, it's going to get worse and worse and worse until you realize what it is that, you know, that you need to learn.
And it kind of harks back to what the collective level too, of what's happening in society. It's like, well, we can get these individual lessons in our more microcosm relationships, but then as a collective, we're learning lessons collectively too. And if we don't actually get through them, they'll just amplify and amplify until it's processed.
Yeah. I had made an analogy of this as like the boot stepping on, like the, you know, big work boot or whatever, stepping on humanity. Yeah. And it's just getting heavier and heavier. And everyone's looking around like, hey, you guys see that boot? Like, 'cause I see it. And at least that's what I'm doing. Like, you guys see that boot? It's getting kind of heavy. And everyone's like, well, I'm just going to go watch my reality TV, you know, like whatever. Right. And it's just going to keep getting heavier until we as a collective society say, no, enough is enough. Get this boot off of our back. We're not doing this, you know, like we want to be together. We want to grow as whatever it is, you know, like whatever the lesson is that society needs to learn. And
and I hearing that, one thing that comes up for me too is the responsibility that I have to upholding these systems of conformity, where, if somebody else just takes care of it, or if I'm like, the government will do it, or, I'm just going to go over here and do something, like the comfort that I get from not stepping into my wholeness is like a responsibility, or like a disowned consent in upholding systems of oppression, because I don't want to, that is in that moment, it's like I'm too, I distract myself from who I could be, because it's so hard. It's hard to step into it. Yeah. And so then it like perpetuates itself where, like you said, I'm like part of consenting to that boot somehow in a disowned way. Like somehow my own comfort and distraction is allowing that boot.
Yeah, I feel exactly as you're speaking. I feel that exact same thing, because as much as I am pointing out the boot, you know, I'm like, wait, who's gonna, you gonna do it? You're gonna move the boot? You know, who's gonna move the boot? Who's gonna move the boot? You know, totally. Because it's like, it is a huge responsibility, and we have created, us as Americans, or just us as people in our society today, we've created such a comfortable way of life that it's like, if I move that boot, that means I have to give up this, or I have to, worry about this, or this might be uncomfortable. And it's hard.
Like the walls are keeping out bugs that would be biting us. It's like,
wow.
Yeah.
It's like, well, so I guess like in conclusion, what we as a society probably need, well, one, it is becoming, it's just being self-aware and understanding our own individual impact. And I think that's happening a lot, especially now, with, a lot of it, people are getting more concerned about the environment. So I think that on a level that's happening, but then at the same time, I feel like on a level, there's a lot more confusion and a lot more like purposeful distractions to keep us from our own self-realization.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it's one of these things that's like we have to all collectively be more conscious of our own impact in society, in our immediate environment, and our world environment, and in order for us to make these changes, well, what is that phrase? We are the one. Yeah, I think my previous guest had said this. We are the ones that we've been waiting for, essentially. Yes. And it's like we can't sit around and expect anyone else to heal ourselves. We have to do it ourselves.
Yep, we do.
And we can't sit around and
we are the only ones that can.
Yeah, we can't expect anyone to heal the world. We have to do it ourselves. Yep.
Yeah, and that can be inspiring and daunting.
Yeah. So it's like, oh gosh, like what's going to happen next? Yeah. But the beauty is that it is a wonderful, I feel like I'm watching a film, the world film, and I'm just kind of like, I'm in it, but I'm also kind of like, that's happening over there. Oh, that's happening over there. That's, and I'm taking these things and I'm changing myself,
Yeah. And the responsibility that feels daunting and heavy, it's like, well, when you really boil it down, it's a responsibility to feeling our emotions. It's a responsibility to understanding how we can show up more wholly, responsibility to processing traumas. It's not like we need to save or fix. It's more like, I can step into an expanded version of myself, which has tough things, but it's also liberating. So, I think that that's the way we can individually help the most the collective transform.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, this has been amazing. And I feel like we could like literally talk for like hours and hours and hours. Like the sun is just going to like go down. We're going to still be talking. But I appreciate you so much for coming on my podcast. And I definitely want to have you back as your book does well, and you're going to do more documentaries, and so we could definitely talk about that in the future as well. But please make sure to check out Gareth's book. It's You Are Us. And where can they find it?
Yeah, so this book is on letsseelabs.com, and that's let's see, like let's see what happens, and then labs like the laboratory. So letsseelabs.com. The book is there. It's also on every major bookstore, Amazon, everything. And in addition, one thing that we didn't quite touch on yet was just that these stories have inspired a leadership development program. So at Let's See Labs, when you go there, you'll also see opportunities to join cohorts for people in leadership development based on what Nicole and I have been discussing today, and about how we can all contribute to change exactly from right where we are at any point in time, no matter who we are, where we came from. And so we're assembling groups to go through those experiences. So check that out as well as the book.
Awesome. That's incredible. And do you have any like socials or websites that other than you are at?
GarethGwyn.com. GarethGwyn.com.
Perfect. So make sure to check that out. Make sure to get her book. Once again, it's You Are Us. And make sure to check out my website. It's nicole-burgess.com. And there you'll find links to my book. You'll find links to my jewelry and my socials, and any of my affiliate links and codes you can check out as well. And I thank you for tuning in and watching. And
thank you so much.
Yeah,
this has
absolutely.
been so fun and generative, and I'm grateful to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you could come. And thanks again. And we'll see you in the next episode.